In a peaceful neighborhood in Chuluata, Florida, the Amato family lived what seemed like a normal life. But on one chilling morning in January 2019, everything changed. 3 members of the family, Chad, Margaret, and their son Cody, were found dead inside their home, the victims of a violent and ruthless crime. The scene shocked the community, and the police immediately began investigating, searching for answers. But what led to such a tragedy? As the investigation unfolded, the truth behind the killings grew more disturbing. The story that emerged was nothing short of shocking. How could a son betray his own family in such a horrific way? What had been happening behind closed doors? The investigation would reveal a twisted tale of lies, obsession, and secrets that nobody saw coming. Would the truth ever fully come to light, and could anyone understand why such a tragedy occurred? The answers would be more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. Welcome to the Crime Series. I am glad to have you join us on another video. Kindly subscribe, like, and share. Let me know where you are watching from. On May 20th, 1989, Grant Amato was born in Orlando, Florida, to Chad and Margaret Amato. His arrival was a joyous moment for the couple, who had worked hard to build a stable and comfortable life together. Chad was a clinical pharmacist, a man known for his discipline, intelligence, and strong work ethic. Margaret, a senior operations manager, balanced a demanding career while still being a dedicated wife and mother. They both believed in hard work, education, and success, and values they hoped to pass down to their children. The Amatos lived in Chuluota, a quiet suburb where families thrived, and life was peaceful. It was the kind of place where children played freely outside, neighbors looked out for one another, and success seemed like a natural reward for those who put in the effort. Grant grew up in this safe and structured environment, surrounded by love and high expectations. Though he had an older half-brother, Jason, from Chad's previous relationship, Jason had already moved out and lived elsewhere, making Grant the oldest child in the household until his younger brother, Cody, was born. From an early age, Cody and Grant were inseparable. They weren't just brothers, they were best friends. They played together, explored the neighborhood, and spent hours immersed in video games. As they grew older, their bond deepened through a shared interest in fitness, and both joined their high school's weightlifting team. They pushed each other to lift heavier, grow stronger, and maintain a disciplined routine. At Timbercreek High School, they were known as the Amato brothers, always together, always supporting each other. But while Grant and Cody shared many interests, they had different personalities. Cody was naturally disciplined, focused, and driven, while Grant, though intelligent, lacked the same motivation. Chad, their father, had always been strict about education and hard work, believing that success came from discipline and perseverance. He expected his sons to follow in his footsteps and make something of themselves. Margaret, though equally ambitious for her children, had a softer approach. She was the nurturer, the one who would ease tensions when Chad's discipline became too much. She believed in Grant and always held on to the hope that he would find his way. After graduating high school, both Grant and Cody decided to pursue careers in healthcare, just like their parents. They enrolled at the University of Central Florida and entered nursing school together. Their parents were proud of them, 2 sons on the path to stable, respected careers. It seemed like they were both set for success. But soon, differences that had always existed between the brothers became more apparent. Cody thrived in school, excelling in his coursework and moving steadily toward his goal of becoming a nurse anesthetist. He was disciplined, determined, and willing to put in the effort to secure his future. Grant, however, struggled. While he had the intelligence to succeed, he lacked the dedication. He found it difficult to stay motivated, and eventually, he dropped out of the nurse anesthetist program. While Cody continued on his path, Grant was left feeling lost and uncertain about his future. Despite this setback, Grant managed to find work as a nurse at Advent Health Orlando. It wasn't the career his parents had envisioned for him, but it was stable and respectable. Margaret, in particular, was relieved that he was at least making an effort. But Grant didn't see it that way. He saw his brother moving forward while he remained stagnant. He saw Cody earning admiration from their family while he felt like a disappointment. The unspoken comparisons between them became a source of frustration, and instead of taking responsibility for his failures, Grant began to resent Cody for his success. Deep inside, Grant struggled with feelings of inadequacy. He began to withdraw, distancing himself from his family and immersing himself in the world of online gaming and fantasy. He blamed his father's strictness, his brother's achievements, and even his job for his unhappiness. He yearned for an escape, a place where he could be someone different, someone respected and admired. He was searching for something to fill the growing void inside him. What began as subtle cracks in the Amato family dynamic would soon deepen into something much darker. In June 2018, Grant's downward spiral accelerated. He was suspended from his job under suspicion of stealing and improperly administering medication. Hospital staff found empty vials of propofol in rooms he had been overseeing, a clear violation of protocol. When questioned, he insisted he had only used the drugs on patients who weren't being adequately sedated, but the damage was done. Soon after, he was fired. Without a job, Grant spent most of his time at home, growing more isolated. He told his parents he wanted to become a Twitch streamer, hoping to build a career playing video games online. Though Chad and Margaret were skeptical, they supported him, purchasing expensive equipment for his new venture. But Grant had no real interest in streaming. His focus was elsewhere. It was during this time that he discovered MyFreeCams, a website where men could pay to watch and interact with live webcam models. That was where he met Sylvia Venceslavova, known online as Sylvie. She was beautiful, charismatic, and most importantly, she made him feel valued. Unlike in the real world where he was a failure, in Sylvie's world, he was important. He pretended to be a wealthy, successful gamer, spending thousands of dollars to keep her attention. The addiction took hold quickly. Grant spent hours each night watching Sylvie, tipping her with digital tokens that cost real money. At first, he used what little savings he had, but that wasn't enough. Soon, he began stealing from his parents and Cody, withdrawing money, maxing out credit cards, and making excuses whenever they questioned him. Over time, he drained nearly $200,000 from his family, all to maintain his fantasy life with Sylvie. When the truth finally came out, his parents were furious. Chad, who had always emphasized discipline and responsibility, was especially outraged. Cody, who had always supported Grant, was devastated to learn that his brother had stolen from him. The house became filled with tension and mistrust. In an effort to help, Grant's parents sent him to a rehabilitation facility for internet and pornography addiction, hoping he would turn things around. They spent $15,000 on the treatment, believing it was their last chance to save him. When Grant returned home, strict rules were put in place. He had to get a job, pay back the money he had stolen, and, most importantly, he was forbidden from contacting Sylvie. If he broke any of these conditions, he would be forced to leave. For a short time, he pretended to follow the rules, but in reality, nothing had changed. He convinced Margaret to let him use her phone when Chad wasn't around, secretly messaging Sylvie and continuing the obsession. When Chad discovered this betrayal, he had finally had enough. He confronted Grant, furious that after everything they had done to help him, he had gone behind their backs again. This time, there would be no more second chances. Chad ordered him to pack his things and leave. For Grant, this was the ultimate rejection. His family, the people who were supposed to love and support him, had turned against him. In his mind, they had taken everything from him. His father had cast him out, his brother had abandoned him, and worst of all, they had cut him off from Sylvie, the one thing that had made him feel like someone important, and in that moment, something inside him broke. The house was silent that evening when events took a dark turn, but it was not the peaceful kind of quiet. It was the heavy, suffocating quiet that follows an argument, thick with tension and unresolved anger. Margaret sat in her home office, staring at her computer screen, but she wasn't really focused. Her mind was elsewhere, replaying the events of the past few days. Her husband Chad was in the kitchen, scrolling through his phone, his face tight with stress. He was likely thinking about what had to be done next, but later went out with a clear warning not to meet Grant at home when he gets back. They had given Grant chance after chance, but this time, there was no more room for forgiveness. Cody, unaware of the storm brewing at home, was still at work. He had no idea that by the time he returned, everything would be different. As Grant sat in the dark, bitterness took root, spreading quickly through his mind. He had always felt like an outsider in his own family. A disappointment who could never measure up. His father had controlled every aspect of his life, dictating his choices, making him feel like nothing he did was ever enough. Now Chad was deciding his fate once again, throwing him out like he was worthless. But Grant wasn't going to let them push him aside so easily. He wasn't going to be the one left behind. A dark, chilling thought crept into his mind, and he didn't push it away. Instead, he let it grow, taking shape into something solid, something irreversible.
As we go into the most intense part of this video, kindly like and subscribe to this channel. It gives me motivation to create more videos. If you love this video and wish to see more, kindly subscribe.
If his family wanted to get rid of him, he would make sure they never had the chance. Margaret was still in her office when he approached. She was completely unaware of his presence. Grant had a gun on him, and without hesitation, he pulled the trigger. The sound of the shot tore through the silence, reverberating through the walls. Margaret slumped forward, her body collapsing over the desk, motionless. The screen flickered in front of her, but she would never see it again. There was no time to stop and process what had just happened. Chad would be home soon, and Grant couldn't let him discover what had been done. Moving quickly, he made his way to the kitchen and waited. In no time, the front door creaked open. Chad was home, but before he could react, Grant fired again. Chad fell, his phone slipping from his grasp. His lectures about responsibility, about being a man, about doing something with his life. Now, none of those words mattered anymore, but there was still one more obstacle. Cody. Cody would be home soon, and Grant knew there was no way his brother would accept what had happened. Unlike their parents, Cody had always believed in him. He had defended Grant for years, but that loyalty had limits. If Cody walked in and saw what had been done, he would never forgive him. And Grant couldn't let that happen. Grant had to act first. Using Chad's phone, he sent Cody a text, luring him home. Minutes stretched. Then, the sound of an engine outside. The front door opened. One last shot. Cody crumpled to the floor, his loyalty repaid with death. Moving quickly, he staged the scene. He placed the gun near Cody's body, arranging things to suggest a murder-suicide. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. People would believe what made sense to them. The story would take shape on its own. With one last look around the house, Grant made his way to the front door. The home he had lived in his entire life, the place where he had grown up, where his family had once gathered, was now nothing but an empty shell. He stepped outside into the night, disappearing into the darkness, leaving behind everything that had once tied him to that house, that life, that family. The next morning, Chuluota remained unaware of the horror. Cody's coworkers were the first to notice something was off. Known for his punctuality and dedication, Cody never missed a shift without notifying someone. So when he failed to show up for work on January 25, 2019, his colleagues grew increasingly concerned. Hours passed without any word from him, a situation that was completely out of character. By afternoon, one of his colleagues decided to call Cody, hoping to check in. When there was no answer, they tried several more times, but still no response. The uncertainty began to turn into genuine fear. Desperate to find out what had happened, his co-workers contacted the Amato family, hoping that someone would know his whereabouts. When they received no response, the situation became even more unsettling. Realizing that something was wrong, Cody's colleagues made the decision to request a wellness check from the authorities. It was meant to be a precautionary measure, something they hoped would turn out to be nothing. But deep down, they knew something was terribly wrong. The police arrived at the Amato home around 9 p.m. When there was no answer at the door and no movement from within, the officers grew suspicious. With no other choice, they forced the door open and stepped inside. Immediately struck by the chilling silence. it was impossible to ignore the heavy, unsettling smell of death that lingered in the air. As they carefully moved through the home, they began to discover the horrifying truth. Chad's body was found in the kitchen, lifeless and sprawled on the floor. He had been shot twice. Moving through the house, they found Margaret's body in the office, her slumped figure frozen in a state of shock. Her computer screen remained on, as though she had been in the midst of something when her life was abruptly cut short. Cody's body was discovered in a small storage room. The position of his body and the look of anguish on his face were heartbreaking. As the police secured the scene, the search for answers began. With the family dead and no sign of Grant, the investigation shifted its focus to finding him. The fact that he was missing raised even more questions. The scene suggests there was no sign of forced entry, and all doors and windows were locked. This pointed to someone the family knew, someone with access to the house. As detectives examined the evidence, they discovered something chilling. The family had been in turmoil for months, with Grant Amato at the center of the conflict. Investigators quickly began to focus on Grant, whose whereabouts on the night of the murders were suspicious. Surveillance footage from nearby locations and cell phone records placed Grant in the area, and the evidence began to stack against him. Meanwhile, Grant's whereabouts remained unknown. The authorities, growing more suspicious, began looking deeper into his recent behavior. Intervention attempts, Grant had continued down this destructive path, and his family's patience had worn thin. Just days after the killings, on January 26, 2019, a breakthrough came. The police received a tip that Grant had been spotted at a DoubleTree hotel in Orange County, Florida. It was there, in the early morning hours, that authorities found and arrested him. Grant had been relatively calm during the arrest, almost detached from the reality of what had just transpired. He didn't seem to show any emotional response, and there was no attempt to flee or resist. When police apprehended Grant, he continued to deny his involvement in the murders. In a chilling interrogation, he stuck to his story of innocence, offering a series of conflicting accounts about the events of that night. Now, with Grant in custody, the authorities could begin to piece together the events leading up to the murders. What had once seemed like an inexplicable tragedy was starting to take shape as a story of a man consumed by obsession, addiction, and deceit. The investigation was far from over, but one thing was clear. The Amato family would never be the same. Grant, who was the prime suspect, was charged to court for murder. The trial began in July 2019, and it was a tense and emotional process. The prosecution presented their case, showing how Grant's obsession with Sylvie had spiraled out of control, eventually leading him to murder his family. They painted a picture of a man who was driven by selfishness, addiction, and anger, unable to accept the consequences of his actions. Jason Amato, Grant's surviving brother, took the stand and testified about the close bond he had with his family, as well as the pain of losing them in such a violent way. His testimony struck a chord with the jury, as he spoke about the devastation the murders had caused him. Meanwhile, Grant's behavior during the trial also came under scrutiny. He was seen as detached and unemotional, further suggesting that he was not remorseful for his actions. But the defense argued that the investigation had been rushed, questioning whether the police had overlooked other possible suspects, and whether they had focused too quickly on Grant. But despite their efforts, the jury found Grant guilty of first-degree murder. However, they did not unanimously agree on the death penalty, which meant Grant would instead face life in prison without the possibility of parole. While this decision offered some closure to the case, many were still shocked by the jury's decision not to pursue the death penalty, given the brutality of the murders. Nonetheless, Grant's sentence marked the end of the legal process and ensured that he would never be able to harm anyone again. Although Grant never directly admitted to the murders, the combination of forensic evidence, digital records, financial motives, and his interrogation responses left no doubt for the jury. The circumstantial and physical evidence allowed investigators to reconstruct the timeline of events with high accuracy, leading to his conviction. Following the conviction, Grant was transferred to the Tomoka Correctional Institution in Daytona Beach, where he will spend the rest of his life in prison. This case remains a haunting example of how obsession and addiction can distort a person's sense of reality, leading to devastating consequences. The life he once had full of dreams, aspirations, and opportunities was now behind him.